It wasn't supposed to be controversial. The producers of The View had pitched it as a light segment. A Hollywood star talking about faith, family, and maybe promoting his latest film. Mark Wahlberg, a devout Catholic with a checkered past and a redemptive present, had accepted the invitation without hesitation. He'd been open about his beliefs before, on talk shows, in interviews, even on Instagram. But this time, something felt different. The lights in the studio were blinding. The audience clapped, the music played, and Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward in her chair, the corners of her mouth lifting, but her eyes sharp. She didn't waste time. "So Mark," she began, voice smooth but pointed, "you've been pretty vocal lately about Jesus. But don't you think people like you, Hollywood people, should maybe keep religion out of the spotlight? I mean, some would say you're using Jesus as a brand." Mark blinked once, then smiled. He'd been warned before. Friends, agents, even fellow believers had told him. They'll try to provoke you. They'll want a reaction. But he hadn't come here for a fight. He'd come to be honest. "I'm not selling anything," he said calmly. "I'm just sharing what changed my life." But Whoopi wasn't done. "Well, some folks think it's dangerous," she continued. "You talk about Jesus, but there are people in this country who've been hurt by religion, by the church, by people claiming to speak for God. And then you come on here talking about faith like it's a universal cure. Isn't that offensive to some?" There it was. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was dense. The studio audience, usually ready with laughs and claps, was still. Even Joy Behar, seated to Whoopi's left, shifted uncomfortably. Mark Wahlberg leaned forward just slightly. His fingers intertwined. His voice was soft. "I know there are people who've been hurt. I've been one of them. I've failed more times than I can count. But Jesus didn't hurt me. He healed me." The studio didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The tension was already electric. And then Whoopi said it. A sentence that would set the internet ablaze for days. "If Jesus healed you, then why are you so judgmental? I've seen your interviews. You talk about sin and repentance like you're some kind of saint now. Sounds to me like you're hiding behind Jesus to feel better about your past." There was an audible gasp from someone in the front row. The rest of the crowd froze. Even the cameraman lowered his lens for a second, as if stunned by the accusation. Mark didn't blink, but his jaw tightened. Not in anger, in clarity. "Before we continue, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And may the truth spoken in love find you where you are." Because what Mark Wahlberg said next silenced an entire nation. Mark Wahlberg took a breath, not out of hesitation but reverence. He knew the cameras were rolling. He knew millions might see this moment. But none of that mattered now. Only the truth did. "I'm not a saint, Whoopi," he said gently. "I'm a sinner. A big one. I've done things in my past I'm not proud of, assaults, arrests, arrogance. I lived for myself, for my own appetite, and I hurt people. A lot of people." The room was silent. He continued. "But when I talk about repentance, I'm not preaching. I'm confessing. I'm not saying be like me. I'm saying, I was lost and now I'm found." His voice didn't rise. He didn't defend himself with force. He disarmed with humility. Whoopi leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. For the first time since the segment began, she didn't interrupt. Mark went on. "I'm not hiding behind Jesus to feel better about my past. I'm standing next to him because he forgave my past. And if he can forgive me, he can forgive anyone." The studio didn't applaud. Not yet, but eyes were wide. Some glistened. A few audience members shifted, visibly affected. Joy Behar tried to break the tension. "Well, that's nice, but don't you think religion, especially Christianity, has caused a lot of damage too?" Mark turned to her, not to challenge, but to answer. "Joy, you're right," he said. "Religion without love is dangerous. Religion without compassion is empty. That's why I don't follow a religion. I follow a person. Jesus." There it was again. That name. In some spaces, saying Jesus is like dropping a grenade. Not because he's offensive, but because he's real. And when someone speaks of him not like a concept, but like a friend, it changes the air in the room. And that's exactly what was happening. Whoopi leaned in again, visibly stirred, but not in the way people expected. "You keep saying that name like it means something personal to you," she said. "But what about people who don't believe in him? What about Muslims, atheists, Buddhists, people who don't buy what you're selling?" Mark nodded slowly. "I'm not selling anything," he said again. "I'm just telling the truth as I've lived it. Jesus didn't die for Christians. He died for people. All of us. Whether we accept him or not, he still came for us. That includes you, Whoopi. That includes everyone. The audience was breathless now. There was no laughter, no applause signs, just truth hanging in the air like mist. Mark didn't look proud. He looked heavy, like a man carrying something sacred. And Whoopi, for the first time, didn't fire back. Not yet, because in that moment, something was shifting. In her voice, in her posture, in her heart. Whoopi's fingers tapped the edge of her mug. Not nervously, but rhythmically, like someone buying time to find the right words. You know, she said at last, I've seen people like you before. People who get famous, then find God, and suddenly they're experts on everyone else's morality. They act like their past gives them the right to lecture the rest of us. Her tone wasn't angry, it was tired. And behind her words, there was something deeper. Pain. Mark didn't flinch. I understand why you feel that way, he said softly. If I were in your shoes, I might think the same. I've seen fake religion too. I've seen it used to control people, shame them, manipulate them. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not who Jesus is. She tilted her head, studying him. So who is he to you, Mark? That question could have been sarcastic. But it wasn't. It was honest. And for a brief second, the whole studio seemed to lean in with her. Mark's response wasn't rehearsed. It didn't come from a press kit. It came from somewhere deeper. To me, he's the one who never left when everyone else did. He's the one who saw me at my worst and said, I still want you. His voice broke, just slightly. I don't follow Jesus because I'm good. I follow him because I'm not. Because I need him. Every single day. There was a long silence. Then Whoopi spoke again, but her voice was quieter now. I grew up in church, she said. But they told me I wasn't good enough. They made me feel like being loud, being bold, being black, being me, was something God didn't love. So I left. Mark nodded gently. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said. But that wasn't Jesus. That was people using his name without his heart. Another pause. The camera cut to audience members. One woman wiping a tear, a man sitting forward in his seat. And then Whoopi asked the question that would ignite the internet, the one clipped and shared by millions. Do you believe that people who don't believe in Jesus go to hell? The studio fell silent. Even the crew held their breath. Mark Wahlberg didn't rush. He didn't panic. Instead, he looked at her with eyes full of sorrow and truth. I believe people choose separation from God, not because he rejects them, but because they reject him. Hell isn't about punishment. It's about distance. And Jesus came to close that distance, forever. His voice wasn't condemning. It was pleading. God doesn't want anyone to perish. That's why he sent his son. To make a way home. It wasn't fire and brimstone. It was brokenness. And love. And Whoopi didn't speak. Not yet. The weight of the question, and Mark's response, hung in the air like incense. For a moment, the set of The View didn't feel like daytime television. It felt like sacred ground. Whoopi looked down at her notes but didn't read them. Her fingers had stopped tapping. Her eyes were glossy now, not from rage, but from something she hadn't expected to feel on live TV, conviction. You really believe all that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded. I'd stake my life on it. I already have. The audience remained hushed. No cue cards could prompt the moment. There was no script for what was unfolding. But how do you know you're not wrong? Whoopi pressed. What if you're believing in a story someone told you just to feel better about your mistakes? Mark looked her straight in the eyes. Because when I was 17, he said slowly, I nearly killed a man. And when I sat in that jail cell, thinking my life was over, the name of Jesus came into my heart like a whisper I didn't even ask for. No preacher. No priest. No pamphlet. Just presence. He continued. And ever since then, he's never left. Through my fame, through my failure, through nights I don't even remember. He stayed. And every time I tried to push him away, he came closer. I don't believe because it's easy. I believe because I've met him. Whoopi swallowed hard. She looked as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Joy Behar tried again to lighten the atmosphere. Well, that's certainly a lot. But don't you think this kind of passion can turn people away too? Mark turned to her gently. Joy, I can't control how people receive it. I just know I'd be a hypocrite to keep silent about the one who saved me. He turned back toward Whoopi. And I know you've been hurt. I see it. But the Jesus I know doesn't shame the broken. He walks with them. He weeps with them. He waits for them. It was no longer an interview. It was an encounter. A woman searching. A man who had found. and the distance between them was shrinking. That's when the camera caught something remarkable. Whoopi, long known for her composure, had a tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She just looked at Mark. Not with anger, not with argument, but with something far more powerful. Honest curiosity. The atmosphere in the studio was no longer just emotional, it was sacred. Cameras kept rolling, but no one on set dared interrupt. Even the producers behind the glass stopped giving notes through earpieces. Everyone was watching, not a show, but a moment. Whoopi finally broke the silence. I think I've spent a long time resenting the idea of God, she said, voice husky with emotion. Not because I didn't want to believe, but because every time I tried, someone used religion to hurt me. Mark nodded slowly. I get it, he replied. Sometimes the loudest voices in religion are the ones furthest from Christ. But I promise you, Whoopi, Jesus never hurt you. People did. She looked down. I guess I never separated the two. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's fair, he said. But it's also why I came here today. Not to preach. Not to convert. Just to say that the Jesus I know isn't ashamed of your questions. He welcomes them. He's not scared of your doubts. He invites them. Then his voice lowered. And if you ever want to talk, away from the cameras, away from the noise, I'll be there. No judgment. Just a brother who's been lost too. Whoopi looked up. There was a long pause between them. The kind that only happens when something deeper is being exchanged. Soul to soul, past the intellect, past the scripts. Then she said something no one expected. Have you ever felt like you were too far gone for grace? Mark's answer was immediate. No hesitation. No thought. Every day, he said. But that's the beauty of it. Grace doesn't come because you deserve it. It comes because you don't. That's what makes it grace. A ripple ran through the audience. People weren't just witnessing an interview anymore. They were witnessing a real-time redemption story unfolding. Not just Mark's, but maybe Whoopi's too. The segment was supposed to be 10 minutes. It was now pushing 25. Producers gestured frantically off camera, but neither Whoopi nor Mark looked away. She cleared her throat. I'm not saying I'm suddenly a believer, she said. But I haven't felt this safe talking about God in a long time. Mark smiled. That's him, he whispered. Not me. That peace you feel. That's him knocking. Whoopi didn't answer. But she didn't deny it either. And that silence said everything. The energy in the room had shifted completely. This wasn't a debate anymore. It wasn't a celebrity interview. It was something far more vulnerable. Far more human. And everyone felt it. Even the usually boisterous panel of The View sat in stillness, watching the raw exchange between a Hollywood actor and a TV icon unravel into something honest, sacred, and surprisingly intimate. Mark Wahlberg took a breath and continued. I don't expect everyone to believe what I believe. That's not my job. My job is to love people whether they agree with me or not. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the panel, then landed on Whoopi once more. Jesus didn't come to win arguments. He came to win hearts. And the people who followed him best weren't the religious elite. They were the broken, the lost, the desperate, the people who knew they didn't have it all together. He paused. That's me. Every day. And still he loves me. A quiet sniffle came from somewhere in the audience. Whoopi exhaled slowly. You know, I've been in this chair for years. I've heard actors talk about faith. Politicians. Preachers. Most of it rolls off me. But something about the way you're saying it. I don't know. It feels less like a sermon and more like an invitation. Mark smiled gently. That's all it ever was meant to be. There it was again. That peace. The kind that doesn't come from clever words or careful scripts. The kind that's felt deep in the gut. The kind that makes even lifelong cynics stop and wonder, what if? Joy Behar leaned in, almost whispering now. Mark, do you really think everyone can be forgiven? Even the worst people? Mark nodded solemnly. Absolutely. That's the scandal of grace. It doesn't make sense. It's not fair. But it's real. If God only forgave the good ones, there'd be no one left to save. He glanced at Whoopi again. I've been the worst person in the room more times than I can count. And still, he came for me. Whoopi bit her lip, her expression unreadable, but her silence louder than words. Mark leaned back slightly, his voice steady. You don't have to believe me right now. But I promise you this, Jesus is not afraid of your doubts, your anger, your wounds. He's not distant. He's right here. Even now. And for the first time in years, Whoopi Goldberg had no comeback. The control room didn't know what to do. The segment was long past its allotted time. Ad breaks had been missed. Schedules were thrown off. But nobody was reaching for the cut button. Because this wasn't just television anymore. It was transformation broadcast live. Whoopi looked at Mark, not as a co-host, not as a critic, but as someone genuinely wrestling with something real, something ancient, something eternal. "What if I'm not ready?" she finally whispered. Mark's answer came with zero hesitation. "Then he'll wait." The words hit like a soft wave over the crowd. "Jesus doesn't force himself on anyone," Mark continued. "He knocks. Gently. And waits. He waited for me through years of violence, addiction, arrogance, through Hollywood, through pride, through fame. He waited." The studio was so still that even the cameras seemed to hum more quietly. Whoopi looked down. "I've spent a long time being angry at God. Angry at Christians. Angry at myself." Mark didn't interrupt. He let the silence breathe. "But maybe," she said slowly, "I wasn't angry at God. Maybe I was angry at who people told me he was." Mark leaned forward, eyes soft. "And maybe today you're starting to see who he really is." That line, quiet, gentle, but saturated in grace, wasn't just for Whoopi. It was for the world watching. For every viewer sitting on their couch, arms crossed, wounded by religion, yet secretly hoping for something true. Whoopi wiped her eye. Not dramatically. Just honestly. "I'm not ready to go to church," she said. "You don't need to," Mark replied. "Start with a conversation. Talk to him. You don't even need to believe yet. Just be honest. He can work with that." It was disarming. Undeniably human. Mark Wahlberg wasn't preaching a theology. He was offering a relationship. And Whoopi was no longer fighting it. Just then, the studio lights dimmed slightly for the scheduled transition. But not a soul moved. The audience didn't clap. The crew didn't cue music. The moment was still happening. And even the most skeptical person watching from home could feel it. Something holy had entered the room. The segment eventually ended. But the impact? It was just beginning. Clips from the interview hit social media like wildfire. The headline blared across every platform. Whoopi confronts Mark Wahlberg on Jesus, then breaks down in tears. Within hours, #Mark Wahlberg, #The View, and #Jesus was there were all trending. But this wasn't outrage culture. It wasn't clickbait. It was reverence. People from every walk of life began commenting, not to argue but to share. Atheists said they didn't expect to cry. Agnostics said they'd never seen faith presented without force. Muslims, Jews, Christians, and seekers alike were united in one common response. That felt real. And that was the key. Mark Wahlberg hadn't shown up to win. He'd shown up to love. Not with clever apologetic or polished quotes, but with humility, brokenness, and bold honesty. He didn't shame Whoopi. He didn't defend his image. He didn't attack. He just stood his ground, in grace. In the days that followed, Whoopi stayed mostly quiet. But insiders say something had shifted. She began asking more questions off camera. She asked for Mark's contact. She requested a copy of the Gospel of John. And one Sunday, without announcement, she walked quietly into a small church in Harlem. No cameras. No entourage. Just curiosity. And maybe hope. As for Mark Wahlberg, he kept doing what he'd always done, showing up. Speaking truth. And letting God do the rest. He wasn't trying to be a pastor. He was trying to be a witness. And that's what changed everything. Because in a world where loud voices fight to be heard, sometimes it's the gentle, unwavering voice of a man unashamed of Jesus that silences the noise. And if you're reading this now, maybe you weren't watching that day on TV. But you're here. And maybe this story reached you too. So we'll end where Mark did. Not with a sermon, but with an invitation. He's not far. Just talk to him. You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest. He's listening.